I'm a donor, and I can be myself as an individual, I suppose, or an institution. I want to support something that I don't want people to know about. Really. Why would I, what would the arguments be for me to do that through a fiscal sponsorship mechanism as opposed to a donor advised fund, if there are any?
I think um, the speed with which you can set it up and how quick and how much you can tailor it and customize it to fit a particular purpose or campaign or situation that you see.
Mhm.
Fiscally sponsored projects can be developed very quickly and put under the umbrella of an existing C3. That's not something you could do as easily or at all just through a DAF. You'd have to give to an existing C3, and so there'd have to be one out there that fit what you wanted to do. If there's not, then you go the fiscally sponsored project route. You get that spun up very quickly, and you can fund it through the C3 mechanism, be it a DAF or a private foundation or whatever else have you. That's the principal advantage, I would say, to somebody wanting to do it that way.
So when people note an increasing use of pop-ups,
Pop-ups.
I don't know
That's
how
why,
measurable, but those are probably, for the most part, fiscally sponsored pop-ups
yes.
projects.
When we refer to pop-ups, we're talking about projects that just pop up because nonprofits you have to go through the entire, application to the IRS, the tax exempt approval and everything like that. It's a much quicker, or much longer process. The pop-ups can be set up within an existing nonprofit and they pop up.
So you float some creative potential. Do I say solutions? No, that's ways to perhaps make things better on this front. Uh, what are they?
Yeah, I think so there's a balance you have to strike because nobody's saying, certainly I'm not saying that fiscal sponsorship should be restricted meaningfully in some, it's some terrible thing out there. Like I think it does a lot of good. I think it helps the nonprofit sector advance new projects and do it in creative ways. So the idea I had was more to increase the transparency around them without burdening the operations of them in any way. At least that seemed to make sense to me. And I thought the best way to do this would be through updates to the Form 990, a couple ones in particular, because I think there's two issues with transparency, and I think you could address them both pretty easily. Um, Form 990, we talked about this. There's no disclosure of fiscal sponsorship on the form. I think you could change that. I think you could do that pretty easily. Depending on what you do as a nonprofit, you're required to file any number of schedules with your 990. You could have domestic grants under Schedule I, foreign grants under Schedule F, related organizations under Schedule R, so and so. The very next unused letter in the list of IRS schedules would be Schedule S because Schedule R is the last one. Schedule S, sponsorship, sponsored projects. Why not have a new schedule for fiscally sponsored projects? Very simple. All you'd have to do is you could structure it just like the current Schedule I does. You could have a table, list all fiscally sponsored projects, revenue, expenses, assets, principal officer, have you applied, yes or no, for tax exempt status, date upon which sponsorship began and ended, if applicable, done. And you would just have that schedule. And that way you would have total disclosure, at least of who's sponsoring which projects, on the delayed timetable that the 990 is released on. I think that
You
would go a
mean,
long way.
and you're describing the fiscal sponsors 990 now, of course.
I am.
If I'm
Yeah,
the
and
foundation that gave to the fiscal sponsor, I don't have it doesn't affect your proposal does not affect me at all.
that proposal. I do have a complementary proposal that would affect the giver. Although I think this is more of an enforcement thing than it is
Yeah.
a new restriction or a new requirement, I should say. I think,
Let's okay, but let's stick with the fiscal sponsors 990. That's
okay.
Schedule S for Stilson, of course.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Coincidentally.
Okay. Tell me again what's in there. Is this one page too? How much of a burden are you imposing on these poor fiscal sponsors?
That depends on how many projects they have or would
Yeah.
have. I mean, if you've got hundreds of projects, like you're an Arabella or you're a Tides, well, it's going to go on for many pages, just like your schedule I would, your grant making one,
Yeah.
your grant making schedule. I think it wouldn't involve any information, any new information to collect. This is all information presumably they have at their fingertips because they're required to maintain these
Yeah.
budgets for this projects. It'd just be a matter of publicly reporting them.
Yeah.
Um, and I
Does
think, Oh, go ahead. I'm
Well,
sorry.
does Schedule S, the hypothetical proposed floated Schedule Stilson, does this require a statutory change or just a rule change or what? I mean, could
I
they do
think
it
you
tomorrow?
I think you could do it through a rule change. You could do it through statute. So the Internal Revenue Code does have, like, they prescribe certain things that have to be in the annual return. But then there's a catch-all in that statute. It says something like, and such other things as the secretary may require for purposes of furthering the tax law, something like that. There's a catch-all.
Yeah.
And I think that would allow you to do it through notice and comment rulemaking. I know that's how they've modified the 990 in the past. The last big revision, I think, was in 2008, 2009, somewhere around there, where they modified the whole 990 through notice and comment rulemaking and and did it that way. I think you could do something similar there.
You'd be attacked viciously by donor freedom uh, advocates, defenders, wouldn't you? This would take, by the way, years. I mean, this wouldn't be popular. You work for a conservative think tank and you're suggesting a new form, more bureaucracy, more paper, I guess I'll say.
More paper.
Do your employers know this? Are you okay with this? I mean, is there going to be a Schedule T next? What's on there?
You know, I don't think so. I think any of the legitimate concerns around donor privacy aren't involved here at all. Nobody, certainly not me, would have any sort of disclosure of donors to the projects or the nonprofits outside of what is already required on the grant making side, right? That's already something they have to do. There's no donor privacy issue. Nobody's name is going to be out there as giving to a project. That's all legitimate. I think if you draw the line, organizational transparency, individual privacy, that's a bright line. And I think this is fully consistent with it. And let's talk for a minute about why this is so important, right? Because fiscal sponsorship, we talk about public policy oriented C3s and political C4s. That's all. We can see those financials in Form 990. We can't see what their projects are doing, these fiscally sponsored projects, yet the projects have become so important to this whole um, ecosystem of what's going on. I mean, you think of, you can just name them off the top of your head, fiscally sponsored projects that just within the last few years have been nationally socio-politically relevant. Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, Demand Justice, Movement for Black Lives, all of these things that have become national news, we're operating and in some cases continue to operate as fiscally sponsored projects. Nobody can have any information about their financials. It's important.
So I'm on your organizational individual. Differential in rights is what you were describing there, really. Uh,
Yeah.
Individuals get more protection. So
Yes.
you would be okay with, and this is not totally unrelated, if a private foundation gives to a DAF, no need to impute motive. But some may do that to get out of, to work around the transparency requirements in spirit or law of the 69 Act. Should that be changed? Should they have to disclose that? It's a private foundation. They don't have the individual rights that you're concerned about. I mean, do they have no? That should be what's coming next from Robert Stilson, right? The proposed rule change, meaning organizational private foundations, well, really can't give to DAFs because it has the effect of allowing a workaround the deal regarding transparency.
Sure. I mean, that's a good point. Um, I didn't raise that point in the article on
No,
fiscal
I'm
sponsorship,
shoving
but
that.
it's a good, I mean, I see why you bring it up. It's the same sort of thing, right? You're using an intermediary to, in effect, if not intent, conceal where the money ends up. Uh, People, DAFs can have that effect. We should all acknowledge that.
Right, I'm just trying to get you in trouble. But and the other one is a sort of maybe it's the same point. Isn't this a camel's nose, slippery slope thing? Uh, I don't. You had your limiting principle was the organization individual thing,
Yeah, I th
and
I think
I mean, I don't know how limiting that is. That opens up a broad swath of potential regulation of organizations if that's your limiting principle. Uh, but even external to that division, what's next? That's why I say Schedule T or something like that. Someone's going to say these groups already know what the race and sex demographic breakdowns of their boards and staffs are. Report that.
yeah, it's a legitimate concern, certainly. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think this stuff has to be taken on a case by case basis. That's in fact, and it's good. I mean, we should be deferential to the nonprofit sector. We should not be aggressively trying to regulate this thing. I devoted most of the article in that fiscal sponsorship piece to justifying why I think this can overcome that presumption against regulation, why I think this particular issue is important to look at for a modest level, very modest level of additional disclosure. So your question is well taken, and I think the point is important to keep in mind whenever we talk about something like this.
To that extent, I'm kind of asking you almost to repeat what you just said, but one could see, and I know you do, and it's in your piece. Uh, this would be an improvement for the charitable sector. I assume you think. And why? Getting rid of bad apples, or at least allowing for someone to wonder whether there is a bad apple, or it's an improvement, I know you think. Why? Why is it worth running some of the risks you've acknowledged to improve the sector, charity?
So I worry about when I think about this sort of thing, and this is sort of the this gets at the politicized charity stuff I've written about. This gets at the Schedule F disclosures, which is a whole other thing. But I worry about keeping public faith in the institution of in the tax exempt sector, and I fear that the way fiscal sponsorship operates, particularly in the public policy area, even in the political sphere and 501(c)(4s, I fear that the way it currently is looks dark to people and looks a little bit behind the scenes. And I think if you had this modest level of disclosure, you could counteract a little bit of that perception. And I do think there's legitimacy in just ordinary. This is the whole reason 990s are open for public inspection, right? You and I can go and we can see what this group's doing. Is this we've collectively society through our elected representatives have made the choice to incentivize the activities of these groups through tax advantage. And I think we should be able to verify what they're doing with their money. And if fiscal sponsorship is a major part of a lot of what these groups do, you could say for some of them, it's their entire tax exempt purpose. Well, the fact that that's not disclosed is an issue.
Yeah,
That's my argument.
yeah. Well, before I ask my final question, of which I only have one, is there anything I didn't ask that you wanted to cover or mention?
I don't. We covered most of the high points. I mean, the things to take away here is the new schedule and then the grant making disclosure. Like if you give a grant to a fiscal sponsor, say you're doing it for the purpose of the project. I mean, that's the big 2 points.
Yeah. Well, the final question then is, what do you think of your boss?
It's a good que- Scott's great. He's a good
Okay.
boss.
Whoa, nervous laughter. Let the record reflect. All right. Well, Robert Stilson, thanks so much for doing this with us today.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me. It was great.